I working for some reason here. Let's try to get this started again. Okay, can you hear me now? Give me a hi if you can hear me now. Hoping you can hear me now. Some Teresa looks like she heard a click. Um, oh my. Spent all that time saying hi to everybody, and I'm not sure. Let me know if you can hear me. Thought sure I had that one settled this time. Okay, very good. All right, starting over. I started by saying that I get questions about sewing and machine embroidery from all directions. And tonight is Q&A part 2, follow up to part 1. And the topic is machine embroidery. So I'm going to focus a lot on stabilizing for successful machine embroidery and give you some of my best tips for getting your embroidery to come out beautiful, just like you want it to. So welcome everyone. This is the Let's Go Sew live show with Joanne Banko, where sewing friends gather to learn more about their machines and be inspired. So I know you all inspire each other, and I appreciate that as well. So let me get in here and say hi to some people. I see Anne from Virginia. Josie Sews. I see Teresa. Sharon from Missouri. Star Raymond is here from Michigan. Janice is here from North Carolina. Diane from Michigan. Carol from Arizona. Cindy from Texas. June from Ohio. Alice from Ohio. Marie from Ohio. Wow, I got all my Buckeye friends here tonight with me. Sheila from Massachusetts. And let's see, Cheryl. Let's Jane. I didn't get to say hi to Jane yet. Barbara. All right. I think we are good. And Anne, interesting. Anne says she is a long armor, but starting to love embroidery. So, Sunny, thanks for your comment there. I hope that tonight you will learn some good things and be able to take what you learned and put it into practice in your own sewing space. Hi, Becky from Mississippi. All right, let's go ahead and I'm going to tell you a little bit more of how I came up with this particular topic. So, excuse me. What happens is I end up, I asked for questions and I was thrilled to get so many. And I started, putting them all kind of in order. And then they ended up falling into buckets. And the last time we did a certain few buckets of different things. And this time I had so many that revolved around embroidery and kind of interrelated to each other. So I thought that we would go ahead and focus on that. But be sure that if you sent me a question and you didn't get it answered yet, I have not misplaced it. I have a whole long list, and I think you can look forward to several more Q&A shows like this one, where I can go through and really dig in and answer those questions. So yes, tonight we are going to start with stabilizers. And I bet if I got in here and got to ask all of you what you, what you have on your top of your mind when it comes to prepping for embroidery, stabilizers would probably be numero uno. And let me take just a sip of tea and clear my throat a little bit. It is wintertime. It is dry. It's been snowing. So that is cause for sipping some warm beverage there. Okay, so let's say starting with stabilizers. I'm gonna start by giving myself kind of a leveling point here and say that it is a huge topic. There are tons of stabilizers out there, and there are lots of companies that make stabilizers. So first and foremost tonight, I'm gonna stay away pretty much from brand names when it comes to stabilizers, and I'm gonna talk on the level of different types. And I will explain them thoroughly, but you will then, be able to look up for your favorite product list and find which one that I talk about matches that. If you don't have a favorite product list, I want you to know that I will be posting a blog on letsgosew.com this coming weekend with resources and links to some of the specific things that I talk about tonight. But that's difficult to do on an online show, so we'll do that in a big blog post. All right. So yeah, Janice says most projects these days call for no-show mesh, and no-show mesh is definitely on my list of must-have stabilizers. It is very, very commonly used. You're gonna probably hear me be a little bit of a contrarian, and it's not because I don't believe that some of those methods work, but I tend to stick to my own criteria, and that's kind of what I want to talk a little bit more about tonight is um, basic principles for stabilizing, and kind of give you an overall view of how I've been creating machine embroidered projects for about 30 years now, and I have certainly made my own mistakes, and I learn something new just about every single time I start a new project. But the principles that I base my stabilizer choices on, and in fact, all of my embroidery process on, are pretty cut and dried. So I think that'll help simplify it just a little bit. Celeste says, thanks for letting me know about the iron-on wash away. Wondering which one exactly you're talking about. Celeste, if you could give me just a little clue as to what particular project that was for, I'd have to think about that just a little bit. Um, Cindy's favorite is water soluble, and we're definitely going to talk about that. So I'm going to pull up my screen that I have with some tips and some pictures on it, and I'll put myself over in the corner just a little bit there. All right, so let's take a look at this, first and foremost. Stabilizer categories, and they really do, stabilizers fall into three major categories. There may be many other stabilizers that fit within those headlines, but basically we have cutaway, and cutaway means if you pull on it, it will not rip or pull away. You would literally need scissors to trim it away or cut away. Tear away, which does pull and rip. And then wash away. Now we'll talk about some other ones that are, kind of along those similar lines, but those are the basics. So for me, yeah, I got lots of rolls of stabilizers. I got a whole batch of them here next to me and a bunch of different samples to show you and talk about tonight. But as far as what I always have on hand, I always keep some cutaway on hand, and that would be cutaway that is fusible and cutaway that is not fusible. Now, mesh is the one that is the most popular. So let me bring up a bigger picture here so that you can see the actual mesh that I am talking about. And I've already seen somebody said they're not a big fan of no-show mesh. Jane rather, I think I can understand that. I might be reading your mind a little bit on why. I'm going to guess it's because you've had some failures with it. So we're going to talk about when and why you would use it. But let's talk about what no-show mesh is. If you look at it, it is either, it's going to have like almost like a little gridded type look to it, kind of a waffly weave. And if it was fusible, such as this one here, you would see the glue would be shiny. So I've got two forms here. I've got a batch that's white, and then I've got a roll here that is cream colored, and the cream colored one is my fusible one. I think you could see that little bit of a sparkle, and that tells you that that's got glue on one side. And Sunny wants to know, is no-show mesh the one that you use for t-shirts? Yes, absolutely. And I'm going to be showing you that very, very specifically tonight. But let's go back to the list here. And cutaway in my book, fusible mesh and no-show non-fusible mesh are the two that I make sure I always have on hand. Now, when would I use fusible and when would I use the just the standard no-show mesh? Well, the fusible one is usually going to add a little bit more thickness to your fabric. So if you're working on a finer knit, and that's primarily what I use the no-show mesh for, then I'm going to use the lighter one, which is non-fusible, and I'm going to use it with, I didn't bring any of my sticky sprays here with me, but the sticky spray that we use to bond stabilizer to our fabric, and that's a temporary adhesive spray specifically made for attaching fabric to stabilizer. So like I said, I didn't bring any of my spray cans here, but that is how I would connect this to my fabric. Yep, Anne's got the right name. That is definitely one of them. Okay, so that is, there are a variety of products, and I say pick the one you like best. Definitely try different ones, because some have a little bit of a finer mist to the spray and are just a little bit easier to use. Now, again, I sprays are something that I'm going to reserve for only when I need to use it. But again, remember, tonight isn't necessarily about saying I always use this plus this plus this whenever I do t-shirts. I do this plus this plus this whenever I do cotton quilt box. I want to give you more of an overview of what each stabilizer has as far as, the good qualities and maybe some of the things we need to be concerned about. And then principles that will allow you to match it up. Okay. So a cutaway and a fusible no-show mesh type stabilizer is rather lightweight, so it doesn't add a lot of bulk. It is very nice for using on knits in particular. So one of my number one rules for doing any machine embroidery is if it's thin or if it's stretchy, I will bond my stabilizer to my fabric. So bonding could mean the fusible mesh, as in the case of a knit, that's going to stretch. In order to keep it from stretching, I'm going to iron this onto the wrong side. Once it's bonded, that knit will no longer stretch. If I'm doing a knit fabric and I need to bond the no-show mesh that is not fusible, then I'm going to use the temporary adhesive spray, which is going to just temporarily hold that in place for me. Okay. So thin or stretchy, it always gets something bonded to it, whether it's fused or temporary sticky spray. Tear away and iron on tear away are my next go-to stabilizers. And I will be showing you some samples of actual garments and telling you what I used in those particular things. I see Linda says her brother dealer said no-show mesh has been discontinued and replaced by power mesh. Well, that's a good question. I'm not exactly sure what they mean by power mesh. It may be, let me see if I can find a quick sample here. It may be one of the newer poly performance type of stabilizers that are designed for specialty knits, like the type of knits that are used in athletic wear and need to wick away. So that's possible. But I guarantee that standard no-show mesh is not going away, because it is one of the most popular stabilizers out there, and it still is my my go-to for knits. And now Janice wants to know, why wouldn't you just iron on interfacing the fabric? Aha, Janice, you're already thinking ahead of the game here. I will get to there. Definitely get to there. Okay, so tearaway and iron on tearaway. When do I use tearaway? And when do I use iron on tearaway? Well, both of those, number one, only get used when I am sure that I don't need my stabilizer to stay in place. So we just talked about cutaway. If cutaway has to be cut away, it means that it's going to stay there with the embroidery for the life of the garment or the piece, and you're only going to cut away the excess. If I use tearaway, then on tearaway stabilizers, it is going to be completely removed when I'm done. Now, one of the first things you might think about is, what happens to all the tearaway that is trapped underneath the stitches? Well, I can tell you what happens to it. It turns to almost dust, because the needle pierces the fabric so many times when it's creating an embroidery design that actual tearaway becomes basically punched out to almost nothing. So when you tear away the excess from the outside of the stabilizer, you're removing the excess, and anything left under the stitches is almost entirely gone. It's gone enough that it doesn't give it any additional support. So that's why we use a cutaway when we need permanent support. Tearaway, whether it's iron on tearaway or regular tearaway, is only when we need temporary support. We'll get into that just a little bit more in a minute. But I wanted to go then into wash away and heat away. Well, those are used basically as a topping. So a wash away would be something that looks like, pull this up so you can see it bigger. Give me a second here. Okay. And I'm going to try to make sure I don't miss any of your questions. So if we get towards the end and I didn't catch them, I'll scroll back. And let's see, my friend Forrest has a good tip here. Make sure to explain the difference between pressing and ironing on stretchy knits. Thank you very much, Forrest. You are absolutely right. So let's backtrack for just a minute. When I do any fusing, I am not ironing on those knits. I am pressing. So I am just lifting and lowering the iron. You do also want to pay attention to the temperature of your iron, and you want to test that first. And in fact, those cutaway mesh stabilizers do not take well to high heat. In fact, any type of synthetic cutaway really benefits from a lower heat setting. If you're stabilizing a large area, it's also a good idea to actually steam your stabilizer a little bit before you actually use it, so that you're pre-shrinking any stretching that might have occurred on that stabilizer just from being pulled on a roll or a bolt. It's minimal, but it is still important. And then the important thing is to always use, the heat setting that will not affect that. So thank you, Forrest. Definitely. Ironing and pressing are two different things. Ironing goes this way, pressing goes up and down. Very careful, very gentle action. Okay, so let's go back to the wash away that I was talking about. The most common wash away that you find for a topping is the clear plastic type. It looks just like plastic, but if I dip this in water, warm water, it will completely melt away. Another common wash away is this one that's fibrous mesh type. Both of these will totally dissolve in water. Both of these can be used as a topper, but the water soluble type is less expensive and is really all you need as a topper. If you have some scraps left over of this and you want to use it as a topper, absolutely feel free to do that. But this generally is reserved for projects such as freestanding lace or other projects where you want this to completely disappear when you're done, but you need a little extra layer of stabilizing. Okay, and Donna wants to know, how do you get the first Q&A? The first Q&A was last month. The fourth Monday of the month, we did a YouTube live show here, and you'll find it on my YouTube channel. Okay, which actually is just a little reminder for me that if you do like this type of programming, and if you haven't already subscribed, I would ask you to please consider subscribing to the channel, and please hit the like button. That helps a lot as well. Okay, so that should be easy for you to find. And then I also have a blog post on it too, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the end. All right, so let me peek through and see. Jane wants to know, what do you suggest for cloth napkins? Okay, great question. Or Suni wants to know what to do for napkins. For cloth napkins, most of the time I'm going to use a tearaway. And when would I use an iron-on tearaway? I use an iron-on tearaway when I want to be able, again, to have that bonded together. So it keeps me from having to use a sticky spray, and it keeps those layers temporarily bonded, so that when I hoop the fabric, particularly with thinner fabrics, it will add a little bit of thickness to that. Okay. All right. So let's get back to that screen where I can show you the last thing. We were talking about wash away or heat away. Okay. What in the world is heat away? Well, heat away is another plastic type. Hang on here. I lost my window. Okay. The heat away is very, very similar looking to the wash away. How do I know the difference? Well, if I sprayed both of these with water, this one's going to melt. This one is going to stay exactly the way it looks. So heat away is another way to simply add a topping to your project, and we'll talk about in a second why we would want a topping. Add a topping to your fabric and not have to wash it out. So in this case, a warm ironed over this. First you tear away as much as you possibly can, and then a warm ironed over this simply causes it to just form almost tiny little balls. That doesn't stick to your iron. It doesn't stick to the fabric unless the fabric is really fuzzy. So my testing is going to be a key there too. But it basically just rolls right off. And what both of those do, whether it's a wash away topping or a heat away topping, is it just raises your stitches ever so slightly off the fabric, so that when we're using fabric that has a little bit of nap or a little bit of texture, it then just keeps that from allowing the stitches to sink down in. Now, if your fabric is highly textured, such as towels, that's another whole topic, and I'm saving that one for a whole show on embroidering on towels. So stay tuned for that. But if we're just, we've got a knit that maybe has a little bit of ribbing in it, a little bit of texture, some piqué knits, really a topping can't hurt you. It's just that you don't always need it. So if you want to add it, fine. Now, Suni, you said you've had less success removing heat away. That's a good point because heat away does take, the ironing in order to make it come off. So if it was water soluble, no matter how much you had there, by simply putting it in water, it would completely dissolve away. With heat away, you really need the working of the heat from the iron to penetrate the whole area in order for it to roll away and disappear. And Janice, your question is great. Can you use a hairdryer for the heat? No, it is not hot enough. It needs actual sole plate heat from the iron in order to come off. So when would I use it? Well, number one, I'm going to use it when wash away doesn't work. Okay, meaning I can't wash that item or I don't want to wash that item. There are times when we're doing embroidery last minute. Anybody anybody want to raise their hand on that one? Like you're brushing your teeth at the same time that you're finishing the project. And if you're doing something in the last minute and you don't want to have to wash it beforehand, then it's nice to be able to have a heat away if it works with your project and your fabric that you can just simply iron off and not have to do anything else. However, if you've got any kind of intricacy in your designs, which means small spaces between the embroidery portions, you are not going to get really good results with heat away because you're going to end up having to iron that so much in order to get it to come off that you may find yourself over ironing your fabric. Okay. And let's see, Jane, you use a topping on all your projects except when you're quilting. That's perfectly fine. Like I said, there's no problem with that. The tiny little bit of layer that we have from that type of stabilizer is so thin that it is not going to harm your project at all. It's just whether or not it's really necessary for you to decide if you want to use it. Okay. And June, I'm making note of your question about the microfiber towels. So we'll save that one for the next show that we do on toweling. All right. So I want to just pop up a few of the comments that were questions that actually came in, and what got me started with this whole ball rolling of stabilizers. So, okay, one of the first ones I got was let's see, from Clovis. And Clovis asked what stabilizer is used the most. Well, I'm going to answer that one right now. It would be the no-show mesh. I would say that's probably a top number one, and then a tearaway layer, because very often we're going to use those together. And I'll talk about that as well. But I would say those would be two of the most popular. And then obviously, depending on what kind of projects you do, if you do a lot of freestanding lace projects, then you're going to go through this water soluble fibers mesh like crazy. And this is actually in another one of my Q&A shows. We'll be talking about this when we talk about off-site embroidery, but that would be another popular one. So that's kind of a subjective question, but I would say cutaway mesh and a lightweight tearaway would be two of the most popular, most often used stabilizers. And Jan asked me, let's see, she asked me if there's a guide to match number of stitches to number of the stabilizer layers. I'm going to tell you more about layers as I go through some of the pictures that I have here, but I have heard that discussed by certain experts in the industry. And, if you found their formula works, go for it. Personally, I do not use stitch count as a criteria for my stabilizers, whether it's the type of stabilizer or the layers. I use some other criteria, which you'll hear about in just a couple minutes. Donna had asked me about problems with puckered embroidery. We are going to definitely talk about how to prevent puckers tonight. So we will definitely cover that. And then Ms. Denise wondered about storing stabilizers. That's a terrific question. In the chat, I would love to hear your comments and your tips and ideas for uh, doing that, for actually storing your stabilizers. And I have a couple images to show you on that as well. So those were some of the main questions. And then Celeste had also asked me about embroidery on knits, and she was looking for placement tips as well. Placement tips are something that I have put together a whole entire blog post on, and I will put the link up here. I'll actually show it so that you can see that for a few minutes. That is something that is very, very easy to follow without having to see it. And there are pretty basic guidelines for um, as far as placement and positioning your design. So I encourage you to look up that tip sheet from letsgosew.com. You'll find a lot of good information in there. All right, so I'm going to go back now to um, giving you kind of the whole premise for this is that my process for stabilizing is based on principles that I follow regularly. So one of those principles is it is always best to test. Okay. So you're going to hear me say that more than one time. And what does that mean? All of these combinations that I'm talking about and all of these different things, I would highly recommend you buy the products. You know, a lot of times dealers will sell stabilizers by the yard so that you can take advantage of only purchasing small amounts. If you can find it that way, I highly recommend that you know, purchase a little of this and a little of that so that you can experiment and make your own samples. And that's really what gives you the guide then for the next time and the next time and the next time. Now, I want to encourage you to do one important thing if you do that. If you purchase it by the yard, either ask them to label it for you before you leave the store, or you make sure that you have some way, even if you bring Post-it notes and a pin, and pin the name of that stabilizer and what it is to your stabilizer before you store it away, because it is very easy to get confused between one or another. You might have wash away mesh and haven't used cutaway mesh for a while, and look at the two and say, this must be that and that must be this. Well, it makes a big difference which one's which. So make sure you know, you're careful with that. And I see, Shirley, you beat me to the punch because you keep your stabilizers in an over-the-door shoe bag holder. And that is exactly my tip for you tonight. I've actually got a picture of that, so I'll definitely show that. That is a great one. So anybody else, please chime in on how you like to store your stabilizers. You know, a lot of it is dependent on what our sewing space looks like. If we've got drawers, if we've got cupboards, if we've got wall space, whatever works for you. And then my friend Forrest again, if he's using mesh, he says he almost always floats some tearaway underneath. Absolutely. And I am going to, as we go through some of the sample pictures, I'm definitely going to talk about that. Tearaway, again, think about it. When I talked about the must-have stabilizers, and I told you what happens with cutaway, it stays there. What happens with tearaway? It gets torn away or literally destroyed by the stitches. Wash away or heat away goes away. Wash out and wash away are what we use when we want something to totally disappear. So a cutaway type stabilizer or an interfacing, and we'll get to that, are really only the two that will stay there permanently. So that's one of the criteria that you're going to ask yourself. Do I need this fabric with this design on it permanently stabilized? If the answer is yes, then everything else here on this list that goes away is off the table unless you add something else to it to make it permanent. But having said that, if we're using something permanent and we need a little additional stabilizer, then we can add a tear away or a wash away or a heat away, because it's going to give us that extra stabilization during the embroidery process, but we know we can remove it when we're done. Okay. All right. Oh, Celeste, that's a good one. Let me bring up some of these different ways that people use their storage ideas. All right, Sharon, you keep yours in a vinyl pocket organizer. Yep, very similar to the shoe idea. Joanne, you store yours in sewing machine suitcases. What a great idea, because those suitcases don't get used probably very often, and it's pretty easy to just take that stabilizer out and put it back in when you come back home with your machine out of there. Very good. Very, very good. And let's see, what did June do? Oh yeah, June, I remember that little glitch that you had where you mixed up your wash away and your cutaway. And if you dip it in water first, you know for sure. Let's see, did I miss any? Cindy's got a great idea. Yep, that definitely works. Anything that would benefit from a that would just be designed to hold tubes would work. And Celeste, you've got a great idea there, and it's something I've used paper towel tubes a lot of times. It was kind of a common practice for me to carry stuff back and forth to classes and demonstrations by rolling it onto a paper towel tube so that nothing would get wrinkled. And so using it for storing stabilizer is a fantastic idea. All right. And Anne, you've got some comments there on how you do yours. And Caroline, let's see what Caroline's idea is. Caroline, in an open over the door rack. Okay, good. Clovis keeps a laundry basket. That's a great idea. Yeah, stand them right up, and then you can see them really, really easily. Very good. Very good. Purse organizer. Yeah, that works. Definitely. Let me see if I can pull that one up. Over the door purse organizer. There we go. Teresa, that's your idea. That's a good one. I like that. Very, very good. All right, so let's go ahead. I'm going to go to the next screen, which tells you a little bit more about the stabilizers that are not stabilizers. So again, as we go through this, we talked about what do we need for that fabric? Does the fabric need extra body for the life of the project? If the answer is yes, I'm going to definitely consider, can I add fusible interfacing or can I add batting? So we'll talk when and where in just a minute here. But as far as the ones that I regularly use, these are the ones that are on my list. So again, I'll have all this information in the blog post that I post over the weekend. But Pellon Shirt Tailor is designed for collars and cuffs. So it's a medium firm interfacing. It's like not too stiff, not too soft, but adds a nice amount of body. And I will use that on a lot of projects where I'm embroidering on a block of fabric that's going to be maybe turned into a pocket or some type of a craft item. And the fabric in and of itself is not firm enough, stable enough, thick enough to hold that embroidery design well without an added layer. And I want something that's permanent. Why wouldn't I use cutaway mesh? Well, cutaway mesh, if you remember me saying, it requires somewhat of a lower heat setting, either to bond or even if you use the sticky spray and you iron it. So I don't want to have that, a cotton block that I'm going to need to iron with a cotton setting and have a stabilizer that is a little bit more heat sensitive on the back. Instead, I'm going to use an interfacing that is designed to work well with fabrics. And it just makes sense because you're talking about garments. SF101. I know I'm going to get some people in here that are going to go, yeah, I use that. And that's another medium weight fusible that will add additional body to your fabric before you embroider. Ultra weft, that is another one. And I will show you in a minute some samples of all of these. Fusible tricot and fusible fleece. So again, it really depends on the project itself, which one you might be using, but any of those and all of those are going to add, aside from the fleece, a little bit more body without adding too much stiffness. So it's basically just beefing up that particular fabric. Okay, and I see I got a question here from Sharon. Would you use Pellon on cotton to applique? You know, I hadn't even thought about talking about applique tonight, but yes, very often when I do embroidered applique projects, if the fabric itself is a little bit, let's say, wishy-washy, and you all know what I mean by that. It just doesn't have a lot of body, doesn't have maybe a tight weave. Sometimes we use less expensive fabrics for certain projects. By adding a layer of iron-on fusible interfacing to the back of that fabric, you are now going to have a much, much, much better quality of an applique. So definitely, yes. All right, so the next one here is actually the picture of the stabilizer in the over-the-door shoe hanger, okay? So I know some of you said you use that, and I'm going to give you my perfect, like, uh-oh story. I have that mounted just to show you that it's next on my list of projects to complete in my sewing space. I had that hanging up on the back of a door, and I used one of those, you know, those sticky hooks. And yeah, I checked the package for how much poundage it could hold first. But I have to tell you, I heard a crash in the middle of the night one night and found out that my stabilizer holder had come down on the floor. So I've got this just hanging temporarily with over the door hook, which is very sturdy. But I plan on putting a permanent hook on the back of my door in my sewing space where that can hang up. But this really is a really, really good way to do it. And then what do I do with all the little pieces and parts? Well, I keep my small pieces that are still big enough to use in another hooping in Ziploc bags. What did we ever do before we had zipper bags? If you want to use drawers or shelves or baskets or anything else that works for you, that's fine. But I always keep, like I said, the pieces that are big enough to reuse in baggies like this. I keep pre-cut pieces because I do occasionally, I have purchased pre-cut. I have fusible no-show mesh cutaway here in 4x4 hoop size pieces. So if I'm doing a lot of left chest embroidery on t-shirts, I've got that good to go. I don't generally buy pre-cuts a lot. I usually prefer to buy mine in a big package or full roll or yardage and then cut it as I need it. But it is nice to have something like this, especially if you're doing a lot of the same type and the same size of embroidery. And then I do keep my wash away in a baggie as well. Let that focus for a second there. And with the wash away, it's really important, especially, and I just mix them together, but especially if you have any of the water soluble plastic type, you want to keep that sealed no matter how you're storing it. If you have it on a roll or you have it in sheets or you have it in pieces, you want to keep that completely airtight. And I did see a question come through earlier. Let me see if I can find it again. I don't see it here really quick, but it was, oh, here it is. Alice is asking, will sunlight coming through the door hurt a stabilizer? I'm going to have to say I don't know. I've never seen that happen, but we've all had synthetic fabrics maybe that have changed color at times. So I tend to try to avoid anything that is fabric like, being in direct burning sunlight for any length of time. Alice, I think you live not too far from me, so we probably don't have to worry about that as much as some other people might. And I'm seeing a couple other comments here that I want to make sure I don't miss. Josie Sews keeps hers in a bin for wrapping paper. That is a terrific way to store your stabilizer rolls. Absolutely, definitely, definitely. All right, and so let's get back into the pictures here that I want to show you. So the next question is what, where, when, and how when it comes to stabilizers. So remember I told you at the beginning I was going to go by kind of like a criteria, like what are the judgment calls that I make? What do I think about when I am preparing to embroider something? And I'm not really using hard and fast rules. I'm using good, solid, general principles. So one of the first things I ask myself, is this wash and wear? If it's wash and wear, meaning it's going to get thrown in the normal laundry, thrown in the normal dryer, then I want to make sure that whatever stabilizer I use is also wash and wear. I can't think of a whole lot of anything that I've ever used that wasn't. But that question also helps me think through how much support does that design need so that when I do wash it and dry it, I don't have to fuss with it a lot. Now, I'm going to kind of share a dirty little secret. And most of you know this if you've done any embroidery at all. And that is that aside from small lightweight designs or designs that we might do on towels, most of our embroidery that's done on a garment needs a little bit of touch up with an iron before it's worn. Certainly not the case 100% of the time, but give me a yes or a no if you agree with that. Just from experience, that you just need that little bit of ironing. And there are ironing people and there are non-ironing people. There are people that will wear clothes with a little bit of rumple to it and it doesn't mean anything to them. More power to them. But think about that when you're creating something that's going to be for somebody else. And do the test, and we'll talk more about that, but do the test so that you can be pretty sure that they don't have to do a lot of fussing with it. It really does depend on what type of embroidery design you're doing and what type of fabric you're doing it on. If you're glutton for punishment like me and you like to wear a lot of linen and natural fibers, or you like to just iron your knits even just to smooth them out, then you know what I mean. You're going to want to give that just a little bit of press. I don't want to miss again, Forrest. He's got another good tip here. Keep all your water soluble scraps if you want to do a blanket stitch with your serger on fleece. Now, Forrest, you have just opened up another whole favorite topic of mine, and that is decorative serging. So I'm going to make myself a quick note here. And that means that that's going to be another topic for another Q&A day, because decorative serging is a lot of fun to do. And yes, you need those water soluble scraps in order to do the blanket stitch on the edge. And it's a lot of fun to do that, and very, very, very easy. So, all right. Thanks for that. That is a good one. All right. So yes, I'm seeing some yes here. We all know we're going to have to give that a little bit of press. Okay. Next question. Is the fabric stable or unstable? Well, if it is really stable, like a piece of heavy denim, and I'm making a tote bag and I'm doing an applique design, and that applique design doesn't have a lot of density, or that embroidery design doesn't have a lot of density, then you know what? I know right off the bat, I don't need to add anything to that that is going to be permanent because the fabric in and of itself is highly stable. If it's questionable, now we think back, oh, what could I add that would give it just a little bit more body and make it more foolproof? That might very well be interfacing, or it might be iron on tearaway, or it might be a regular tearaway. But that's another question. Is it stable or unstable? If it's unstable, I know I need to add something to it. And I know if it's unstable, I need to add something that will stay there permanently because the fabric in and of itself cannot hold up on that with that embroidery design. Temporary or permanent? Do I need my stabilizer to be temporary or permanent? Again, that's, kind of follows along that same line of thinking. Is my fabric stretchy or thin? Remember, anytime I embroider on anything stretchy, I am going to bond my stabilizer to the fabric. So many of us want to do embroidery on sweatshirts, t-shirts, and other knits or woven fabric that has stretch to it. So my criteria for that is absolutely my stabilizer needs to be bonded. Bonding either by a fusible stabilizer that has the fusible already attached to it and is simply ironed on, or fusible temporarily because I have made it fusible with a sticky spray so that during the embroidery process, it stays stuck. Thin fabrics, I will, then again, I'll think again, back to the question about the napkins. Napkins, you're not going to do a big heavy design on a napkin and be able to have the opposite side of the napkin have a clean finish to it. You would have to have something, permanently there. So if you're doing something like a monogram that's going to be relatively lightweight and you want that stabilizer to be removed, then you can use a removable stabilizer. But you still might need that fabric to be a little thicker when you put it in the hoop. That would be the perfect place to use an iron-on tearaway because that fabric is a little bit thin. Maybe I'm doing a handkerchief or something like that. Again, something that thickens up that fabric is going to make it hoop tighter, and I'll always get better results when my fabric is hooped snugly. So what else could I use that would be like the tearaway, but I know would go completely 100% away when I was done? That would be, let's see if I can grab my one here that let's see. Where is that little bolt there? Of course, it's the one that fell on the floor. All right, so I'll just talk about it for now. It literally fell on the floor there. The adhesive backed water soluble, which is essentially the same as the fibrous water soluble mesh, but it has a sticky side. That is wonderful anytime you need to have, again, a temporary bonding, temporary added thickness, temporary keep it from stretching, but when you're done, you want it to completely go away. So there is a form of this with an adhesive backing. It's a little bit pricey, so it's kind of the one that I don't use all the time unless it's going to be the perfect choice. Is your project going to have quilting on it? So if you're going to do it as a quilt block, and you might be stipple quilting around that, or you might be adding quilting in your, using the capability in your machine, then again, I'm going to think, well, what would be a good thing to add some body and beef up that fabric? To me, it would be batting. And there are non-fusible battings out there, which work great, and most batting kind of sticks to the fabric by itself, so you really don't need any bonding agent. But I like using fusible fleece, and that really just again bonds to the fabric, adds some thickness. And if I'm doing that on something that's going to be quilted, I might add another whole layer of quilt batting when I put my quilt together, but that little bit of fusible fleece will just give it a little bit of a better surface for the embroidery, and it just adds, again, a little bit of thickness. And then I'm going to ask myself, do I need this to disappear? So when we talked about all those disappearing ones, remember, they're only adding temporary help, and then they're going away. Okay, so let's talk about top tips for preventing puckers and just general overall mishaps with your embroidery. And I'm gonna show you some pictures right after this that are going to kind of clarify these. Match your fabric and your design. That's probably really and truly, aside from buying stabilizers, testing them in various different ways, testing your design on the same type of fabric with the same stabilizers, with the same everything that you're going to do on your actual project as close as possible to the real thing before you embroider is, one of my best tips. You can't always do that, or you don't always need to, because you might have done something almost identical to it before. But when you're thinking about putting an embroidery on any item, think first, does the fabric match up with my design? If I've got a lightweight linen fabric and I've got an 8x12 embroidery design that has fill stitches from end to end and corner to corner, there is no way that I'm going to be able to have success with those two matching together, because they're just not friendly to one another. If I want to do that design, I've got to find fabric that has more stability and a little bit more thickness, or fabric that I can add more thickness to that stays there permanently, or I'm just not going to have really, really, really good results. Proper placement and prep. We're going to talk about that. Stop the stretch. We've talked about that. That is numero uno important. If you have any fabric whatsoever that stretches and you put it in a hoop without adding stabilizer that stops it from stretching, you're going to have an issue with your finished embroidery. So we want to think about starching, maybe stiffening or interfacing. So how do we starch and how do we stiffen? That may be done with a product like this. Very popular, very common. If I'm going to do maybe a quilt block, and again, it's, I don't want to have a lot of extra stabilizer on the back because it's going to be put into a quilt and I'm going to do some quilting around it. But I want that fabric to be very firm and, almost paper-like when I'm embroidering on it. That's where a product like this comes in really handy. There are others out there. I've been using this one for years and years and years, way before this came out. They both work pretty similar, but you got to read the labels. With this one, you soak your fabric, you let it dry thoroughly, and then you iron out the wrinkles. With this one, you soak your fabric and then you basically iron over it until it's dry, so you can use it pretty much immediately. The Material Magic, I would say, does maybe give you just a teeny bit more stiffness, and this one's a little bit harder to find, but check your dealer. This has been one of my go-tos for a long time. Another one that is you might find available at your dealer, or if you shop online, is this one. It's a liquid spray. So I really prefer the ones that are more in a this type of either refillable type bottle than I do the aerosol ones, but whatever works for you. Okay, so back to this whole idea here. Starch, stiffen, or interface. If I need that temporarily stiffened, I can use something that will wash out. If I need it permanently stiffened, I'm going to use interfacing. Float lightweight tearaway underneath. I will do this in many cases when I've done everything else, just as an added extra precautionary measure. And when I say lightweight tearaway, I mean lightweight tearaway. I find the lightest tearaway, it may be called medium. Some of the tearaway I have actually is called medium, and it's actually light. But you'll know by the fact that it's very, very pliable. And by not hooping that, but just floating it under the hoop, again, remember, most of it's going to be obliterated, and it's just going to give you that little bit of extra stability and smoothness. You may consider quilting your layers and then embroidering on top of that. If you've got batting, whether you've layered it or fused it, that's another way to do it. Make sure you always match your hoop to your design size. That is probably, again, one of the top, like if this could be highlighted, that would be highlighted there. If I'm stitching a 4x4 design, I am not going to use an 8x8 hoop. Number one, I'm going to have to use too much stabilizer. Number two, there's going to be all that extra room around that fabric that could be pulling in and getting distorted by that little embroidery design that has to keep, forming in the center. And you're basically having to move, a little bit of all that fabric, and that could cause some puckering issues. Preset your hoop tension. What in the world do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to show you a little example, but I am going to be adding a video to the blog post that follows up on this so that you can see it step by step. But when I say preset the hoop tension, this is another one of my top tips. Let's just say, for example, here, I'm going to be embroidering on this piece of felt, and I'm going to add a lightweight layer of tearaway stabilizer, and I want to hoop these together. I might use the sticky spray to keep that connected, but I might not in this particular case if I don't really need to. I am going to take my hoop and I am going to loosen the screw until I'm able to put these layers in. I'm going to put them in just kind of haphazardly here so that you can see. I'm going to have to get that in, okay? But if you could see this, you'd see that that is very loose. That would pop out very easily because, there we go, it popped out because my screw has been loosened. This is what I call pre-setting the hoop. So I'm going to keep this flat on a table. I'm going to push the inner ring and the outer ring together until they are flush and where they need to be. And then I am going to tighten up that screw. So I'm going to go ahead and lay this down and do this. Oh, and while I'm talking about this, let's bring up Cindy's comment. Great thought, Cindy. What about the machine-based icon? I did not even think to add that in, so thank you so much for bringing that up. Machine basting is a great way to add insurance that your stabilizer layers stay put and stay together. I still prefer to bond, and I still, like, if it's stretchy or thin, I'm bonding my stabilizer in some way, shape, or form to my fabric beforehand. But there are a lot of times when you are floating the layer and, the fabric is stable enough by itself, and simply using the basting, if you have it as an option, will keep those layers together. The only time I think about, being very cautious about using basting is if the needle piercings would affect my fabric, because sometimes that happens where the embroidery hits, it's fine. But if you had some needle penetrations in outside areas, some fabrics will show those holes. So you want to be careful with that. Okay. So now you saw my hoop was loose. I have put it on the table and I have tightened up this screw until I really can't do that any tighter with my fingers. I'm going to give you a little, like, it's okay if you have trouble hand tightening that, to give it just a little tweak. We got these great, I got to push that in there. We got these great new little screwdrivers here, or you can use a regular screwdriver, whatever works, that you can put right on the screw and give it more turn. Now, if I can do that by my hand until it's snug, and it would take a lot to tighten that more, I'm going to use hand tightening. But I realize not everybody has the hand strength, though you have my permission to do this. But what you want to be very careful is that you don't overdo it, because it's really easy to overdo with a screwdriver, and you do not want that over tightened. You just want it snug. Okay. And I see Janice has a good question. Adding some pins in the stabilizer on the outside on the hoop. Yeah, you know what? That is something that I haven't done a lot, but I have kind of learned that technique recently as well. I tend to reserve that for doing freestanding lace. So we will definitely cover that when we do the show on offsite embroidery. So, but yes, for regular stabilizer, I'm pretty much not needing to do that because I'm stabilizing my fabric well, and you've already heard how many times I am securing those layers together. Okay. In the hoop projects, they need to trim on a flat surface. Very good tip for us. Thank you for sharing that. Yes. In the hoop projects, which means you are laying your fabric down, which that's even the most of the stabilizer rules that I've talked about tonight don't really apply much to in the hoop projects because they have their own particular process. And very often when you're doing in the hoop, you're starting with a stabilizer that's hooped already, and you're simply layering everything on top, and everything is getting anchored in place by the in the hoop stitches. And yes, very often with those projects, you are having to remove and replace your hoop multiple times, and you need to do different things. You need to lay another piece down. You need to trim away something, that's got to be removed before the next piece goes on. Always, 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 always do that on a hard, flat surface. In fact, thanks again for bringing it up, because everything I hoop, no matter what it is, garment, quilt block, small sample piece, every single thing I hoop, I do two things. Number one, I do it on a hard, flat surface, meaning a table. Number two, I stand up when I do it so that I have the power and pressure from my shoulders and arms to secure that the way it should be before I put it on the machine and embroider. And you saw, that I put those layers together and hooped in a traditional manner. We probably could do a whole show on non-traditional hooping, but as much as possible, I like to hoop my fabrics and have them secured in the inner and outer ring. If I'm using a magnetic hoop, that's a different story, but that's still being secured between the two. But I like using that particular method because I think it gives you one of the best holding powers that you can get with having your layers there. And Susanna, that's a great question. Do you countersink the inner hoop? That's going to a little bit depend on your hoop itself, but you will notice that hoops have very often a little kind of nubby on them, and that's designed to keep you from pushing that down too far. But you do want to countersink that to the point where it is touching the inner ring, and the outer ring are touching at that point. Other types of hoops, such as multi-needle hoops, they are actually designed for the hoop to go down even further. And kind of your criteria, if you can see what I'm doing with my fingers, I can feel that this inner ring and the outer ring are at the same level. So on this particular hoop, that's how far down that needs to be sunk. It's really hard to push it down too far, but on multi-needle hoops, that's a little bit of a different story, because those you will actually see that recessed even further. It is really important to get that down as far as it should be for your particular type of hoop. Absolutely. All right. So let me go back here and see. Let's see. Okay. So let's get back up to that particular screen there. And let me get this one down. I'm going solo here tonight, so you gotta keep in mind I gotta do click all the buttons myself. So that's presetting the hoop tension. Offsite embroidery is another option. And like I said, we will do a whole show on that. Freestanding lace and some kind of clever ways to do offsite embroidery, which means you're embroidering somewhere else and then attaching your embroidery to your actual project or to your garment so that you're not having to embroider directly on that piece. That can solve some issues too. Okay. So we've only got just a few pictures here now that I want to show you to kind of back up all that I've been talking about. So many of you are familiar with my book titled Wrapped in Embroidery. And the whole idea behind wraps was to make embroidered wearables, whether it was a scarf or a wrap, that would have, that nice, soft, free flowing type of wearability. And that meant that the designs themselves had to coordinate with the fabric. So you might remember in the earliest point of the show here, I talked about matching your design to your fabric. When I created the designs, or I didn't digitize them, but I, created the design ideas for the particular projects that were going to be in the book, I told the digitizers, I'm going to be embroidering this on a relatively lightweight fabric. I'm going to be embroidering this design on fleece. I'm going to be embroidering this design on a medium weight woven fabric that turned out to be a suede cloth. I'm going to be embroidering this design on a silky synthetic or a silk dupioni fabric. So each one of those was, created with the mindset that those embroidery designs would be compatible with that fabric. Now, if you're working from, other combinations, you have to just, again, think about it. Lighter weight designs go with lighter weight fabrics. Heavier weight designs need fabric that's more stabilized. That's pretty much the simple rules to follow. And then once you think about all those things and you then do a test, because it's always best to test if you haven't used that combination before, you will now see if that was a good combination. So I'll tell you exactly what I used on this. I used an iron-on tearaway stabilizer. Let me grab my little sample here. I can actually show you what that looks like. And while I'm doing this, I'm thinking, I know somebody had a comment of sticky stabilizers that leave sticky on your needle. And that is a really, really good point to think about. First of all, if it's a good quality sticky stabilizer, you're probably not going to have that problem. If you don't overspray, you're probably not going to have that problem. If you do encounter that issue regardless, then you just want to kind of keep an eye on it and periodically take a little bit of rubbing alcohol and clean your needle off, and you'll be fine. It's a little bit of a, you got to stop and check it and do it, but it will definitely work. So I'm going to pull this up so that you can see this real quick. This is my sample of iron-on tearaway. So this particular one is called Fuse and Tear. It feels almost a little bit like freezer paper, but it's not, because it's made to be embroidered in. It's not meant to hold fish in your freezer. It's got a dull side and a shiny side. And in the sewing and embroidery world, shiny always means sticky. In pretty much every case I've ever come across, it means that is going to be the side that you're going to want to attach to the fabric and not attach to your iron. So when I did this particular wrap, I knew those designs were lightweight enough that I didn't have to worry about having any additional stabilizer left over. I did it on a single layer of rayon batik, ironed this iron-on tearaway, and when I was done, completely removed the stabilizer so that nothing was left. When I did the fleece, I used the cutaway mesh. I used the cutaway mesh on the pocket areas, but on the actual, I have the actual sample here, on the embroidery part where the closure is. I tested those designs. I could have used the mesh on the back, but I wanted, if possible, to just have a clean look. So sure enough, I was able to do this with just a water-soluble stabilizer added to it. The adhesive back water stabilizer works really well for that. And when I was done, I was able to dissolve that all away. I also wound a bobbin with the same thread color so that I didn't have any bobbin thread showing on the opposite side. Really doesn't show, that doesn't really open up and show, but I thought it would be nice to have it look good on that particular side. Okay, so this one, I only embroidered on those bands, and this was the perfect time for me to use one of my favorite interfacings. So I told you I had samples of the interfacings, and before I embroidered that band, I interfaced that whole area with fusible tricot. So let me show you those different stabilizers, or interfacings rather. This is fusible tricot. Again, I'm not, I got some brand names there, but you may find some different ones at different places. It's tricot because it looks like lingerie or looks like a slip. Fusible, it's got a rough side. So that rough side happens to be the glue. And what we have with this is it's stable in the lengthwise direction, but it has just a little bit of stretch in the crosswise direction, which doesn't really change things much. It just makes it just a little bit more flexible. So this is a great addition to lightweight fabrics, such as that. It's a very lightweight dress weight suede. This is also a good way to add an extra layer of body to knits that you want to embroider on, particularly if you are embroidering on a whole yoke area or you're constructing a knit garment from scratch. You can use this as a layer on your entire piece of fabric, and it'll just give it a little bit more stability. Another one that's similar to that, it again looks very much like lingerie, but this one actually has a stretch in all directions. So this is what I used when I did let me see if I can bring this one up. When I did the silk du peony, or synthetic crepe back satin is another fabric that I use for these types of scarves. And I wanted to add, again, a little bit of body, but I really didn't want to change the character of the fabric. Because this stretches in every direction, it maintains the character of the fabric and doesn't make it stiff in any way, shape, or form. It just gives it just a little tiny bit of extra body. This is another area, the fleece, where I use the water soluble. Now, jackets. My new jacket collection is embroidery and applique, but in these particular cases, every single jacket that I did had a little bit of stretch to it. So I've got, I'm going to skip to that one and I'll skip back to that one. I wanted to use then a cutaway. Why? Because it had stretch. So if you look really close at the picture on the left where I'm showing the wrong side, you can see that in the yoke area, you probably can guess, I used a no-show mesh. I actually attached it with the sticky spray so that it would be bonded to that fabric, because that was a double yoke area, but the fabric did have some stretch. On the back of the jacket, that was just a single layer of stretch denim. So here's another little trick for you. If I need a little bit more stabilizer there, instead of upgrading to a thicker cutaway, and there are thicker cutaways. If you have one you like, fine. What I will do instead is I will take 2 layers of no-show mesh and I will bond them together with my temporary sticky spray, and I will use that in place of 1 layer of a heavier stabilizer. And then for all of these, I did float tearaway underneath, and the tearaway was completely removed when I was done. So just to backtrack here to talking about planning and prepping, um, in these particular garments, I used the fusible tricot in the entire area. On that whole band area, there's actually a seam on this dress, and you could see the seam on this one. And you can see what I did here. I used black because this tricot type does come in different colors. And I stabilized that entire panel. Now I could do that because none of that area of the garment needed to have drape or flow. It could maintain a little bit of stability. And that way I knew I could embroider designs that were maybe a little bigger, maybe a little bulkier, and not have to worry about that. And Shirley, you got a great question. Is there a reason you pinked the stabilizer? I like to pink my stabilizer. I did it just to show you these samples, just because I was cutting it out really quick with my pinking shears. But that does make me think, when I use the cutaway like I did on the jackets there, and you see that I pinked it. Yes, that is a common practice for me. I use pinking shears, and it just tends to feather the edge a little bit, especially on fabrics that might have a little bit of show through or are a little bit thinner. You don't see the hard edge of where you cut away the stabilizer. So it just kind of softens that edge just a little bit. So we are really getting close to the end here. I just have a few more examples where I used certain things, and again, went by that whole criteria. Tearaway. I used tearaway on this lightweight, relatively lightweight linen blouse, because the design itself is very open, doesn't have a lot of density to it, but I was also able to starch that linen a little bit before I embroidered on it, and then I simply floated tearaway underneath and removed the tearaway completely. So when my embroidery was done, I wasn't left with additional stabilizer on there. Why wouldn't I use cutaway mesh? Because linen is going to require higher heat, and I don't want to have to iron that with a higher heat, number one. Number two, the design itself and the fabric itself were compatible. How did I know? I did a test. I had a piece of linen that was almost the exact same weight, and I embroidered that exact same design using the same conditions before I stitched it on that blouse. I actually threw it in the washer, threw it in the dryer, and wanted to see how it would come out. So again, that's what I mean when I'm talking about testing. All right, so we got just another couple here. Where do I add interfacing? I will do that very often on home decor. When I'm doing home decor, it's something that the backside is never going to show. It will benefit from some extra stiffness. So on the pillows, I added fusible interfacing, and that could either be the fusible interfacing like the Pellon shirt tailor, that's what this looks like, or the weft style, and that I have that listed as well, so you can go back and check that out, because both of these types will just add a little bit of extra firmness, and they're really, really good when you're doing home decor. This throw here was pre-quilted, so that gives you just another idea. If your fabric itself or the item you're making can be made and embroidered on quilted fabric, you can do the quilting beforehand, and that way you know when you do the embroidery, you've got that added extra layer of batting that is going to help with stability. This is another crafty type project where I would use batting, because that's going to give me just a really good way of adding a little bit more stability to that. And my project itself has some stippling in there, so technically that's kind of quilted. But these heavy, dense designs were done on a regular cotton weight fabric. If I would not have added fusible fleece to it, I would definitely have had puckers. So think about that, when you're doing it on lighter weight cotton. you're going to want to either add interfacing, or if you can add fusible fleece, that will be a good combination. Thank you, Celeste. I really, really appreciate that. And yes, you are right. That particular collection has much more than just jacket ideas, and you'll be seeing that here, there, and everywhere as I use those designs on many, many more things. All right, so like I said, we are just about done here. So tearaway, quilting, batting, just a couple tips for knits. When I am prepping for knits, like I said, I like to use the fusible mesh is pretty much my go-to for that, especially on a knit that is not too sheer. I'm going to iron this to the wrong side. If you notice, what I did is I extended it up into the neckline. And that's another benefit of the mesh, is by extending that, I don't necessarily have to hoop my entire garment. I can simply have a little bit of that extend and still have my whole hoop filled. I was careful to choose a design that wasn't too heavy and wasn't too dense. And then when I embroidered it, I simply turned it, right side out there, and then rolled up all the extra fabric. So kind of nested that. And then I did add a topper. So kind of, again, just to culminate all this and think about what you've seen here, matching your fabric and your design so that they're compatible is important. Placement and prep on those dresses, I was careful to prep that fabric with an added lightweight layer of interfacing. You saw me do that on some other things. And then I made sure that the placement there was going to be in an area that didn't disrupt the flow of the fabric. Always make sure you stop the stretch. Starch, stiffen, or interface when you need to. Float lightweight tearaway underneath. In most cases, I will add that as long as it's going to be removed enough that is suitable for my project, because it'll just add a little bit of extra body and smoothness. Quilt layers and then embroider. That's a great technique to use on a variety of projects, especially craft projects and decor projects. Match your hoop to your design size so you don't have a lot of extra floppy room there. And then also make sure that you are, presetting that hoop tension. That makes a really, really big deal in, having your layers smooth so that you're not tugging on the fabric once you've already got that hooped. And I will be showing that in a video for you. And offsite embroidery is certainly another option. Now, many of you have been following. If you haven't followed previously, I would love for you to, again, subscribe to the channel, like the video if you enjoyed it. And if you do visit my website, you will find many, many, many more tips, tricks, techniques, blog posts, free downloads, and lots of things that will help you with all of your sewing and all of your embroidery. Again, I really do appreciate you being here tonight. On my YouTube channel, you will find many other shows. In fact, I've got one whole show on preventing puckered embroidery, where I go into great detail and show you many samples. It will back up everything I said here tonight. And then I've got a whole show on machine embroidery on any garment. So both of those are really good resources for you. Speaking of resources, you can be sure that I will be following this up with my letsgosew.com blog post over the weekend. If you're on my email list, you will be the first to get notification, and you will then be able to go through that post, same thing I did the last time, and click on those resources and dive in a little bit deeper into that information so that you've got a great way to back up everything that you heard tonight. It's also a place for you to ask more questions. So thank you so much for being here tonight. You've been a great, great, great group. I love the way you share your sewing and ideas with each other and with me. And I'll look forward to seeing you again next time. Until then, I wish you a world full of pretty stitches. Happy sewing.